Hi, and welcome to the final session of Powbox Secure at Home. I'm Rick Kuwahara, COO and Chief Compliance Officer of Powbox, and I'm really excited to close this two-day conference with a session on usable security, a human-centric approach to security, being joined by Julie Haney, usable security researcher at NIST, and Andrew Hicks, national practice leader, High Trust, and VP of Risk Assurance at Fraser and Dieter. We have a lot of great discussion points to go over today, but if you have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to drop it into that session chat right next to the screen there, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. We'll try and save it to the end of the discussion, and if we don't get to it, then we'll do a written response and we'll get that out to everybody, after the conference. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Julie and Andrew and have them just say a brief intro about themselves. Julie, maybe if you can start.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me. So I work for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, which is a federal agency under the Department of Commerce. And I am a computer scientist and a cybersecurity practitioner by trade. I've done that for many years, for over 20 years. But when I came to NIST, I became the lead of the usable cybersecurity program there. And so I'll talk a little bit more about what usable security is. But really taking all that background that I had in cybersecurity and putting a little bit of a twist on it to look at that human aspects of that.
Thanks. And Andrew?
Yeah, great, Rick. Thanks. Appreciate it. Julie, pleasure to be working alongside of you here. So my name is Andrew Hicks, National Practice Leader for our High Trust practice here at Fraser and Dieter, also VP of Risk Assurance. And my background, so I've been in information security for, 20, 25 years, showing my age here a little bit, but in several different facets. So I've been in charge of running internal compliance programs, HIPAA and High Trust being the most respective of my background, but I've also been involved with risk management and information security. All three of those from the internal perspective, but over the past, 10 years or so, 10, 11 years from a consultative perspective. So previously I was VP of Healthcare Assurance at Coalfire, shifted over to Fraser and Dieter a year ago, and the outward focus is very much the same, helping organizations get through these compliance and risk management initiatives that they have and overcome their challenges, go to market, things like that. So that's been my background. Again, excited to be here and talk to our audience.
All right, great. Thanks, Andrew and Julie. We're really excited to have you both. And just to kick things off, just to level set here, maybe we should just define for everybody what we're talking about when we're saying usable security. What is, how do you define usable security, Julie?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start first with the usable part of the security, right? The usability piece. So usability is all about the extent to which people can use systems, products, and services with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. And so usability or usable security definitely takes those usability pieces into account, but it kind of goes beyond that to more broadly consider people's relationships with security and their interactions with security. And so usable security is really about taking human factors into account. And looking at how people make security decisions, what are their perceptions of security, how they interact with security mechanisms, and ultimately, how do we design usable systems and products and policies that also result in an improved security outcome. And this is kind of easier said than done because usable security is often overlooked. Unfortunately, a lot of people that are designing these technologies and policies and processes don't take the needs of the intended users into account. They don't consider their skill levels or their limitations or the constraints that they have. And all we have to do is look at some of these kind of unusable password policies with all this complexity and changing your password all the time as a good example of an unusable security solution that ultimately forces people to take less secure workarounds. So like writing their passwords on a sticky note, or keeping their passwords unencrypted on a file on their computer where we're using the same password. So the focus really is making these technologies more usable for the user, so that they don't have to do these workarounds, that there's not a lot of burden put on them.
Thanks, Julie. And Andrew, how do you kind of, take that thought and, I guess especially with, your experience, consulting and, where you've seen with working with clients and things, how do you kind of see that in the real world?
Yeah, so I'm gonna piggyback on what Julie said, because I like that you separated usable from security. I think those two words, you want them to be harmonized together in a perfect world. But far too often, security is enforced without the usability side of it. So I just want to point that out. And the way I kind of see it, when I think about usable security, I think about three different elements. One is security itself, the mechanism that we use to make sure controls are in place and that we're not subject to a cybersecurity attack, things like that. We're not subject to compromise. So you've got the security element of it. You've got the business itself, right? The business is there to generate revenue, to do good things, to be efficient, to perform services or work on behalf of the organization. And then the third element of the triangle, so to speak, is the human element. These are the end users, the employees. And again, I'm going to use that word harmony again. When you have all three of those collectively in a harmonized state, you've got the right level of rigor around your information security program, the right level of controls that are implemented without restraining or constricting the needs of the business or the satisfaction of the end user. So that's kind of what I think about. I think from an example standpoint, when I see organizations that have way too restrictive controls, end users, they're smart. People are smart, and they will look for avenues to circumvent controls that are too problematic or don't allow them to do their job. They'll circumvent controls and do various workarounds, which obviously is a much worse state than if the control would have been implemented right to begin with.
Right, and that kind of leads us to the next question, where how can the concept of being more human centric or thinking of the user help actually improve the security of an organization? And Julie, maybe if you can start off there.
Yeah. So I think one of the issues that Andrew definitely alluded to is security is often considered this very technocentric domain. And there's kind of this attitude that if you have good security solutions, then you're good. That's going to solve the problem. But and again, as Andrew said, there's a lot of these other factors that have to be kind of in harmony. There's a lot of factors involved in whether something's adopted, whether a security practice or technology is actually adopted. So that you have all these organizational factors and you have these individual human factors as well. So you can have the best technology, but if it's never fully adopted or causes just so much frustration that people end up having to work around it, then that's a big problem. So ultimately, what you want in your organization is you want people to buy into security. You want them to be active participants. You want them to be able to recognize the value of security within the organization, and also that they share personal responsibility. Security is not just something that you throw over the fence to, that's the job of the IT people or the security people, and I don't have to worry about it. Everyone needs to see what their role in security is. But when you don't take their needs into account, when security becomes too much of a burden, because for most people, security is not their primary task. That's not what they sit down at a computer to do. And when they don't understand the reasons behind some of these security decisions within the organization, or don't have the knowledge that they need to make good choices, they're just not going to buy in, and they're not going to be able to be those active participants that you need. So taking that human-centric approach and having more usable security solutions is really critical to having this healthy security culture within the organization, which can then lead to just improving the overall security posture.
So I'm gonna comment on that, but Julie, you took all of my thoughts. So I'm gonna maybe use an example here. I've been involved in organizations where we've built products and services to go to market. And I think about when I do that, I'm engaging the market. I certainly don't want to spend a lot of time and effort developing something that nobody's going to buy. So think of any product or service out there, and that's just, same example. So you start considering, as part of your go-to-market strategy, what does the end customer want? What problems are they currently experiencing that I want to solve? How do I make my product or service appealing to the market, satisfy something that they need? All of these things that Julie talked about, and then you kind of pivot that to, this topic of information security and usability. And I think of, the CISO organization, where they are basically the service provider out to the organization, which is business units and end users, and they are orchestrating and developing controls and technologies and solutions that ultimately they need buy-in from those end users, from the customers. The business is the customer in this case, and if your information security program is siloed off and they're not talking to the business or the end users, again, back to the workarounds and the problematic structure that you're creating in your organization. One thing I've seen a lot over the years, it's a really easy example, but one thing I've seen a lot over the years is when I go into organizations and ask them where their data resides, I hear of SharePoint sites that are not inventoried. I hear of Access databases, certainly spreadsheets everywhere, and these different tools contain PHI, credit card information, all kinds of sensitive information. And the reason they exist is because typically somebody is bypassing a control, usually an access control, if they don't have privileges to that source of data. So they get the data itself from some other workaround, and now that data is in an Access database that's not overly well controlled. It can be easily disseminated throughout the organization or outside of the organization. So tying back to Julie's point of really being cognizant of what the end user, the customer is saying and needing is really important to designing a security program that is effective and that works.
Great. And that does tie into, the concept of ease of use, thinking of that end user, not making it overly complicated, which is actually a little bit different than how most people think of security. They think of, adding things and making it more difficult, and, difficulty equals security. So is it hard to get buy-in on the more people-friendly approach?
Go ahead, Andrew, I'll let you go first.
Okay, I'm going to change it up here. I don't think it's hard to get buy-in. I think it just takes time, it takes effort. I think those are probably the biggest drivers to doing the right thing, because it is the right thing. You do want it to be, consumable. You do want the organization collectively to gain buy-in. You certainly don't want to, like we've been talking about here, implement a technical solution or a control that restricts the business and causes negative consequences. An example I'll give there is I did some work for an organization in Ohio, and as a consultant, I was thrilled to be getting out of there in the 2 weeks I was there, because the organization, the culture was negative in the aspect of there was so much control around physical security. You had to badge into the parking lot, badge into the building, badge into the hallway, badge into everything. In some cases that's good, but they had cameras everywhere. They had access, logical access that was strictly enforced. And really what it did is it created this culture that was just negative. People didn't want to be there. Their jobs were restricted. They couldn't do what they needed to do. And I think people ultimately, they want to be part of the solution. They want to be, they want to be heard, especially when it comes to not being able to do their jobs, or when they've got a creative solution, an innovative idea to be more efficient, but they've got a technical control that's prohibiting that from happening. So I think people collectively want to be heard and want to be involved. And I think that just kind of goes to supporting this initiative of information security is not an organization within an organization, it is the organization.
Thanks, Andrew. Julie, anything to add? We can jump on to the next one because I think this next one is going to be something that's pretty interesting to think about as well, because we're talking about security here. And, can the same human-centered approach be applied to compliance as part of the overall security strategy? And maybe, it's kind of, Andrew, when we talked before, this was a point that you made too, is that making sure people understand too that compliance is not security as well. Can you approach compliance in kind of that same human-centered way?
Yeah, I'll start. Julie, you're on mute, by the way. Yeah, I mean, you can, but again, it starts with the end user. So being knowledgeable of what compliance initiatives your organization, is foregoing is very good. But again, tying it back to the human element, people want to be involved, especially in a compliance-centered environment. And my gosh, there's so many compliance initiatives out there these days: PCI, HIPAA, HITRUST. I see NIST a lot. There's a lot of things that people are doing, some frameworks, some standards, some regulations. But again, adapting the security strategy around the human element and what works, especially as it relates to compliance. Rick, to your point about compliance versus security, this is a long battled conversation, or not really battled, but a topic that you hear a lot about. And compliance and security are not the same. And I still see a lot of organizations, usually startups or kind of the SMB organizations, that they're using compliance as the driver, inherent driver, or the unintended driver of security. And that's the wrong approach. It should be flipped the other way around, where security is driving its initiative. We want to be secure, we want to be safe, we want to have protected information, but we also have to weave in those compliance elements associated with it. So when you get into like business process controls, it's really important to bake that into both the compliance and the security strategy, so you're effectively meeting both at the same time.
Yeah, so I apologize on the last question. Right before I was about to unmute myself, a big like update thing, Java update popped up and my Zoom screen disappeared. So I apologize.
Those always happen like here and now when you're presenting.
Sorry about that. So I'll answer this question, and then I want to circle back to the previous question too, but about the compliance. One of the things that's also important to mention is that the compliance guidance should be usable in and of itself as well. You really need to kind of tailor that to the audience that you're trying to reach. So for example, a large company that has a lot of IT or security staff can probably wade through a 150-page document. But a small business, as Andrew mentioned, it may not, because they may not have dedicated security staff. They may not have the security knowledge, even though they still have to comply. And so when we're putting out these types of compliance documents, they really need to be digestible. They can be put out in different formats that appeal to different types of audiences. And they also may need some like extra kind of like scaffolding to explain basic security concepts to those that may not have that background. And then just very quickly, circling back to the previous question, in organizations, we talk a lot about security awareness for users, right? Well, I think there needs to be like usable security awareness for security practitioners. Because what I found is that although, I mean, we do have like the security professionals that are just like, oh, users are stupid and they just need to do what we tell them to do. But most of the time, my experience has been when you talk to people about the human element and why that's important, and then give them guidance on what they can actually do, they're very open to it. And part of the reason that they just don't do it, it's not a like a deliberate or malicious choice. It's just that they were never trained to do that. That's not in their educational background. It's not in their professional development background. So I think there really needs to be more of a push to make the security practitioners more aware of that human element and how it can really help them in their organizations.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks for circling back on that. That's a great point. And we do have a question that's there, but I do think that before we get to it, just to make sure that people can kind of walk away with something, what's one takeaway that you think people could start implementing today to make their programs more human friendly?
So yeah, I mean, getting back to the whole point is that usability and security, they really need to coexist. You can't just focus on one or the other. You're just not going to have good outcomes. And so one of the things that in organizations, we need to empower people. Yes, by giving them like actionable and achievable guidance and make them aware and make them active partners. But we also have to do as much as we can to take away some of the burden from them. So they shouldn't, all the security decisions shouldn't be pushed down to the user, because most of them just they don't understand security. So they're going to make mistakes, and we can't expect them to always be perfect all the time. So as much as we can do on the back end as possible. So for example, with phishing, I mean, most of us at some point could be susceptible to a phishing email. Okay, if it's crafted well and it comes in at the right time, we might be susceptible. So instead of just putting all the burden on the user to be able to make a decision like that, what can we do in the back end to filter a lot of that out and try to catch at least some of the easier ones to begin with? So it's just those types of things, like not expecting the user to always make good security solutions and to help them along the way.
I think mine's a parallel to that. I don't think it's the same thing, but I wrote down the word listen. Like the information security function department needs to listen to the business. I've been saying that kind of over and over again. And I'm not saying listen from the CISO talking to the VP of some business unit level. I'm talking about the information security organization listening to the business, whether that's through a questionnaire of sorts or just sitting down and spending time. I know that's hard in this day and age with COVID and everything, but it's the ideas and the thoughts and the things that are important to building a effective information security program don't usually come from the top level. It comes from the bottom, because you're interacting with people that are actual users of systems and recipients of information security programs. So it's really important to get their buy-in, to get their feedback and listen and bake that into the design of the program. One other thing I was going to point out, because that's kind of happening, Julie, I'm not sure, I don't know NIST well enough, but I know like in HITRUST, I believe in ISO as well, it's kind of baked into the program where there are requirements, there are controls that say the organization, the business has to be speaking through to the Information Security Office to inform them of risk management activities, unacceptable risk to the organization, so that they can then take action on that. So it's actually being ingrained in some of these compliance or information security framework activities, which I think is a really good thing. Helps drive that point home a little bit more proactively.
Great, thanks. And this does kind of tie into a question that we got that is a pretty big question, I think, actually.
Julie, it's all yours.
But Julie, you touched upon it a little bit, but what are some ways that organizations can avoid human error?
So we have a little bit of a mantra in my group. So I'm in a usability group. So usable security is part of what we do, but we kind of look at human factors and usability as a whole. But we want to make it easy for people to do the right thing, hard to do the wrong thing, and easy to recover when the wrong thing happens. Not if the wrong thing happens, when the wrong thing happens. So we have to give people enough kind of guides and pointers so that it takes effort not to do what we want them to do, if that makes any sense. And again, to be able to support them, to have backups in place. I mean, security, we always talk about security like there's, it's tiered defenses, there's layers of defense. And so we need that as well. So the user is one layer of defense, but we have to have other things in place as well.
I'll
Yeah,
maybe add to that a little bit. And Rick, if I got the question right, how do we avoid user error? I think that was the question.
Yeah.
And I would just say it's, why did the error exist in the first place? What's the root cause of that error? Again, kind of listening and being, in line with the business and understanding why those errors exist, what happened to cause that, and then taking corrective action to prevent that error from going further.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in that in this thinking of the user is not necessarily also trying to put the burden on the user too, right? You're thinking, I like that point you made, Julie, in your mantra about making it hard for them to do the wrong thing. I think too many times that's not the case. And to Andrew, the point that you're seeing in, people you're working with, talking to the business units, getting that conversation, because it's very easy to write a policy, put it out, and then if you're not thinking of what the user's doing, it's not going to get done, right? Is there a way that you can see those, have you seen how those conversations are fostering? Is it hard to get people to, I guess, have those conversations versus, a lot of times compliance and things like that is really top down. There is not a two-way conversation.
I don't think I don't think it's hard. I mean, people naturally, I believe, want to talk. And when I approach someone and say, I want you to be part of my solution, I want to hear your thoughts. We're architecting or making changes or evaluating our cybersecurity program, and we want you and your feedback to be part of that. I think people are generally receptive to that, especially if it's for the good of excuse me, them and their role, the business as a whole. I think people are receptive to that and interested in offering up feedback and opinion. Sometimes you might have to incentivize them a little bit. Maybe there's a drawing or something for the people that provide responses or whatnot. But I think, people generally want to open up and share their thoughts and perspective.
Okay, great. Well, Andrew and Julie, I really want to thank you both for your time, taking time on your busy schedule to be with us for the conference and sharing your insights. It's been really great having you both here today, and really enjoyed the discussion that we've had.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And for everyone else, this wraps up PowBox Secure at Home. We want to thank our sponsors, HITRUST, Beyond LLC, Goodwin, and HIPAA Ready. And thank all of you for attending and taking time out to be with us this year for PowBox Secure at Home. And hope that you'll stay tuned and be with us next year. If you have time and you want more resources and things, you can go ahead and visit our website, powbox.com. On our blog, we'll have recaps, videos, and other information, highlights coming from the conference. If you haven't been able to attend a session, you'll be able to find it there. And just subscribe and you won't miss any updates. So on behalf of everybody at PowBox, I want to thank you again for attending, and have a great rest of the day.